There are very few days left before the polls close on July the 4th, and many of us have already voted. According to all polls, Labour will win. But much of the campaign has been about a party with no seats, which may win no seats. Reform. Sorry, they do actually have one seat now, I think about it. Labour and Conservative have joined together to attack a party that allegedly harbours racists. So why so much fuss about an also-ran party? Perhaps because there could be 100 Conservative candidates whose fate hangs on how well Reform does. Under Britain's first-past-the-post electoral system, what matters is how the ballots in each constituency fracture between the contending parties. Where Reform does well, for example, it could be that a mediocre score by the Labour candidate is enough for victory. And if Tories are nervous, so are the pollsters, because measuring the Reform vote is difficult. It didn't exist in 2019, when we last had a general election, so how can we track variations from a baseline that doesn't exist? Will the pollsters fall flat on their algorithms? I have with me the political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heale, and the former Labour advisor and political commentator, Stella Shansikidou. It's lovely to see you both. Welcome to GB News. Stella, have you on the left been intrigued by the performance of Reform UK? I mean, it seemed to me like kind of the only story in this campaign that party has put on a fair number of percentage points. And could you also tell me whether you think that the two sort of scandals that Reform UK has been involved in, one is the references to Putin that were made by Nigel Farage. The second has been the exposure of this alleged canvasser whose first name is Andrew. Do you think they've set Reform back? Do you think they've peaked? Do you think their number would go down between now and polling day?
Intrigued. Michael, I've been underwhelmed. They're doing exactly as I expected them to do. Nigel Farage is, very good at marketing. That's why he's saying that Reform is a startup party. But they're deeply unserious, and that is why they get the candidates that they have. They don't have the establishment backing, sure, but they also don't really have a concrete set of policies. I don't think they're doing better than any of the other populist or smaller parties in other European countries. I would expect them to be doing better if they are to overtake the Conservative Party. I think that a lot of the support that they're getting right now is going to decrease after the elections, depending on how they do, because I think that they're getting the protest vote. I don't think that they're going to be able to develop that kind of base, and it's exactly because of the issues that you mentioned, right, with Russia, for example, because Nigel Farage is trying to appeal to people who want to defend Western values and who want someone who is going to be on their own side, and that he comes out and he has some deeply, deeply unpopular ideas for the British public. So I do not see how he's going to manage to actually have an electoral basis that would be workable, not just in the first-past-the-post system in the UK, but frankly in any European country.
How can you be underwhelmed by a party which is well ahead of the Liberal Democrats, our traditional third party, and which may get more votes than the Conservatives? And on this point about the vetting of canvassers and so on, nowadays this needs resource. If you're going to do criminal checks and you're going to check people's Twitter and so on, this costs hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I want to put it to viewers, actually, that the situation we're now in is that people on the whole don't want to give money to political parties, but they want political parties somehow to have the resources to vet every Tom, Dick and Harry who walks in to help them deliver leaflets.
Am I supposed to have sympathy for a man who wants to be Prime Minister of one of the greatest countries in the world in 5 years' time? Because he can't find the money. He can't find the money. I'll tell you why I don't worry about Reform votes surging. Because it's a protest vote, and I'm Greek, and I have seen this happen again, and it's going to happen again in this country. And let me tell you something. If the centrists manage to overtake the far right in Greece, OK, people get offended when I call them far right. They're right, whatever they want to call it. The populist right. If the centrists manage to overtake the populist right in Greece, they are 100% going to do that in a country that is as obsessed with status and the establishment as the UK is. Because you know what? No right-winger in the UK wants to be someone who is in a third, fourth party. They all want to be conservatives. That's what they all want to be. That's what Nigel Farage wants. He wants to be taken seriously, and he's failing.
I think you're right on that last point. He wants to be taken seriously. He wants to be seen as a future Prime Minister. Have you been on the right, James, more impressed, less underwhelmed by Nigel Farage? I mean, as I say, as we talk at the moment, it's possible but they'll get more votes than the Conservatives.
Yes, I think that you also see the clear difference between him and Richard Tice as leader. As soon as Nigel Farage came back, you see this jump from around 13, 14 points in the polls to around 17, 18 now. And that clearly is down to Farage's personality. He's done something that no one else has been able to do in British politics. I would say he's up there with sort of Joseph Chamberlain as one of the great change makers of British political history right now. He's someone who's done this again and again at things like the 2019 Euros elections, came top of that poll. First time any of the other two main parties had come top of a national poll in this country. And he's done something again in this campaign. I think the key thing, of course, though, is what you're saying there in the earlier questions is about the last week or so. And I do think Reform have had a few missteps, backsteps, I think, on Russia and I think some of the vetting row. And they chose to lean into them. They tried to go after Channel 4, very critical of that. I think that was a mistake. And I think that actually you've seen some of the polls maybe drop off slightly. So although we were talking earlier...
Have we?
I think we have seen in the last couple of days or so. There's been a few which have dropped off. And I think that talking to pollsters, they think it'll be around, more 15% rather than 20% that it could have been.
You think it was a mistake to lean into the Channel 4 thing? I mean, what Nigel Farage is alleging is that this man, Andrew, is an actor. Well, I think that's pretty well established. He's an actor. The significance of that is still in dispute. But, I mean, clearly what he's implying is that there's some kind of setup here that he's going to get to the bottom of. Now, I mean, that raised in my doubt a question mark as to whether the story was right, whether it was rigorous journalism. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's raised a question mark. Why do you think it was wrong to lean into that?
I think that you can suggest this man is a fantasist or whatever without suggesting there was a kind of conspiracy behind it. And I think you can do that in a way which says Channel 4 maybe got mistakes wrong, made a misstep here, rather than actually talking about sort of the insinuations around a paid actor or something like that. I think that was perhaps overreach. And I'd only say that, for instance, when they were sort of putting out media, statements about saying that they're going to refer this to the Electoral Commission, the Electoral Commission came out yesterday and said they hadn't had any such letter yet. So I think that all I'd just say is that, it's sometimes better to dismiss these things. I do think he's right to say you can't expect the leader to be held accountable for everything an activist says on the doorstep, while also just moving on and kind of focusing on a key message and punching that Tory bruise endlessly on migration, which previously worked so well for them.
You move in Tory circles. Do you think I was right or wrong to say that there might be 100 Tory candidates who are nervous that because of Reform's performance, either Reform might win their seat or Labour might win their seat or indeed Liberal Democrat might win their seat, but the fracturing of the vote is dangerous to Conservative candidates? Massively
more so. I think 2015, if you look at the breakdown, I think about half of UKIP's vote then half was from Labour, half from Conservative. So it hurt the Labour in the north, hurt Tories in the south. What we're seeing now more is that vote coming more from the Conservatives than Labour. And the danger for that, of course, is that it disproportionately affects them. And I think it's the worst of all worlds for the Conservatives. They've got the Liberal Democrats in the south, Labour in the north, Reform hurting them all across the country. And that's going to be fascinating when we have the, the autopsy and what happens after 4th of July. And people are saying, do we move more in a Reform direction? Do we move more in a Liberal Democrat direction? All these things. I think a Reform good showing is more likely to kind of strengthen the hand of people who say we should put Nigel Farage in the party and embrace Reform's position on different things like tax and migration.
Stella, do you have a feeling about the polls? And what's interesting me about the polls, obviously they've all said that Labour is going to win. Then we've had these polls which, instead of having a sample of 1,000 or 2, have had samples of 18 to 20,000, which use this methodology which is called MRP, in which supposedly you can attribute the characteristics of the voters. And these are gathered in some detail, and then you apply them to voters in individual constituencies. So you can even generate projections of individual constituency results. Now, these polls have been done, and of course, they all show a Labour victory, but the range of Tory seats has been between, about 50 and 150, something like that, which is quite a broad range. I wonder whether the pollsters are pretty nervous, and I wonder what kind of behaviour the pollsters are engaging in at the moment, because a pollster perhaps doesn't mind being wrong if everybody's wrong, but a pollster hates being out on a limb and wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there is far too much polling going on. And I think the reason why there is far too much polling is because there is a market for it, because new polls every week basically give us something to talk about when there aren't any new policies, and there isn't any willingness, frankly, to discuss policies in detail. Arithmetically, it doesn't look like they're going to be wrong. I don't think you're going to have a situation like in 1992 where, they were off by 9 points, because for the very simple reason that the polling, as you said, they're using a much more sophisticated method now. If anything, do I expect the vote to be consolidated around the Tories a tiny bit more by the time we have the elections? Perhaps I do. I still believe the side Tory think I still think it's a thing. I still think there are people who are embarrassed to say that they're going to vote for the Tories. I don't think that's going to mean that there is going to be a hung parliament or anything like that whatsoever. I think Labour is going to have an overwhelming victory.